when it comes to ICE, immigration, customs and enforcement, it's faced criticism in the past, but under the second Trump administration, he's used the agency. He's been accused of using it as his own personal political weapon. Here in
Sure.
Oklahoma, you, Senator Brooks, have filed a bill to ban masks for local law enforcement and immigration operations, Senate Bill 1234.
Yes,
Uh,
sir.
can you talk a little bit about why you felt the need to file that bill?
Well, and so I think part of the strategy is to ensure that state and local law enforcement aren't conscripted by federal authorities, that we protect states' rights. And so part of the concern that I have is that there seems to be a lot of federal overreach going on, right? Whenever it comes to law enforcement and a lot of these other things. And so for our own law enforcement, I think, perhaps for them to be conscribed or forced to work directly in some of these groups with ICE actually going out and apprehending people, maybe to be able to create a bill or a law that would require state and local law enforcement, because I understand we can't regulate or require things of federal law enforcement just
Mhm.
because of the supremacy clause of the Constitution. However, for state and local law enforcement, we can do things to regulate them. And so my idea was that anytime that law enforcement, state or local law enforcement determines that it's necessary to be able to have masks that hide their identity. And so I'm not talking about face shields or anything else like that, because I understand that those could be necessary. But if it's a mask that's designed to hide someone's identity, that they'd be required to be able to get a court order the same way they're required to get a court order for a search warrant or arrest warrant. And so my way of thinking is if an officer doesn't necessarily feel safe or feels like it's warranted, at the same time that they go to get the arrest warrant or the search warrant, they can ask for a separate court order to be able to do that. And so the other thing that I did is if there are multiple arrest warrants, that they're required to get a court order for each arrest warrant. And so it's not like you could get a blanket arrest warrant, yeah, a blanket permission to be able to use masks to arrest a bunch of people, that it would have to be individualized. And so again, I think more than anything, it's intended to protect personal liberty,
Mhm.
right, and protect states' rights and local control. Because the idea of ICE officers hiding their identity, having badges that don't necessarily identify who they are, and wearing jackets that misidentify them as police, and then also to be able to go in unmarked vehicles into neighborhoods, that is obviously it destabilizes neighborhoods. It makes things less safe. And so I am not a fan of the current administration and their strategy as far as apprehending people who are undocumented and even sometimes U.S. citizens. But I'm really, really, really interested in trying to protect our law enforcement and trying to protect our citizens and neighborhoods as well.
Mm. Well, it's interesting because, in Minnesota, of course, the nation's spotlight is there right now with the current Operation Metro Surge that the Trump
Yeah.
administration has undertaken. And police chiefs in Minnesota recently held a press conference stating that even some of their officers, they say, have been racially profiled at
Right.
gunpoint. Here in Oklahoma, we've had protests, we've had people speaking out against what they're seeing across the nation. But we
Right.
also do have ICE operating here in the state, right? We have Operation Guardian by the governor, where Oklahoma Highway Patrol is working essentially as ICE and with ICE. And there have been reports even by native tribes that tribal citizens have been racially profiled and stopped.
Yeah.
Now, you posted recently about a proposed ICE facility, a large-scale ICE facility that is looking to be used in South OKC. Um,
Right.
you said you had deep concerns about it.
Absolutely. And so the reason, I mean, obviously, there are a variety of different reasons that I have deep concerns. First of all, because it's in my district, right? Senate District 44. Second of all, it's probably within a mile of my house, and it's someplace that I drive by on a daily basis. And then also my concerns as an immigration attorney, as far as the conditions in this proposed detention facility, and then also kind of as a human being, because they're not talking about constructing a new facility. What they're talking about is repurposing an existing facility. So currently, this is a 500,000 square foot warehouse that was developed by an out of state developer. Probably about 2 years ago, but it was built and designed with the purpose of I would suppose storing inventory, storing boxes, not necessarily for warehousing human beings. And so I have real concerns about ventilation. I have concerns about the density of the number of people that are going to be detained, and whether or not that could cause the kind of health issues as far as contagious diseases. I also have concerns about the density of people, and if they're held there without daylight or anything else for weeks at a time. That sometimes I hate it, but when sometimes you treat people like animals, you hold them in cages, and you don't give them the opportunity to be able to breathe. You basically you oppress them in that situation. Oftentimes, for better or for worse, people will react not as their best selves, perhaps as animals as well. And so I'm concerned about violence in these facilities, because they were never designed to warehouse human beings. These are places that were designed to warehouse objects, boxes, things like that. And so there aren't any that I'm aware of. There aren't any windows in the facility. There's not anything else. And as far as there's no details so far in any of the documents that we've received from ICE, what the detention portion of this is going to look like. And
Mhm.
so they mention a medical facility, they mention a cafeteria, but they don't mention how they're going to detain people. And so my concern is that it could be reminiscent of what happened during COVID and during the first Trump administration, where it could be chain link cages, basically detaining. And we don't know if it's only going to detain men, or if it's going to detain families, or if it's going to detain children. And so the other thing is that they're talking about building guardhouses around it and surrounding it with fences and razor wire. And so my neighbors, the people that live in my neighborhood, never bargained to have a secure facility like that a half mile from their house whenever this out of state developer built this building and designed and built this building, that it would turn into basically a detention facility. I don't think there have been any provisions made for, if people are released on bond from this facility, how they get transportation, or how they're able to communicate with family members to be able to get picked up. And so it's kind of, on the edge of Oklahoma City. And so it's not in a large kind of metropolitan area where there are a lot of facilities or transportation.
Mhm. As a state lawmaker, we're heading into our next legislative session. Uh,
Right.
on a local level, city council has limited options when it comes to stopping this project, although it does have options when it comes to delaying and seeking out oversight. Um,
Right.
on the state level, what are your plans to address this issue with your colleagues on the Republican side? Historically, both
Right.
Republicans and Democrats on a national level have funded this agency that is now receiving calls to be reined in, some calls to be
Yes.
abolished. What kind of conversations do you hope to be able to spring with your Republican colleagues?
Well, and so absolutely. So I think I tend to think of myself more as a moderate, and so I've worked for 30 years as an immigration lawyer.
Mhm.
And so the idea of abolishing ICE doesn't necessarily make any sense to me, because I think that uh, correctly regulated, they serve an important purpose, right? And so it under previous administrations, the mission of ICE has been to apprehend those people who have prior criminal records or prior immigration records and make them a priority. Well, my mission is to try and help people in sometimes in those circumstances, but I understand as law enforcement, it's important to be able to protect our borders, and it's important to be able to protect our citizens and to enforce our immigration laws. Now, ideally, there's discretion, and there are opportunities for those people who play by the rules to be able to pursue their permanent residence. But as far as abolishing ICE, that's something that doesn't make any sense to me. As far as reaching across the aisle to Republican colleagues, I think that just like you have different Democratic colleagues, I think that there are colleagues all over the spectrum as far as people who kind of understand and respect the rule of law, respect, the previous regulations and requirements that have been placed on ICE on how they encounter people and how they arrest people. And to be able to make sure that we go back to a nation of laws where we follow the regulations on the book, whether it's the enforcement handbook or if it's federal statutes or state statutes, that we go back, because my concern is that if you have law enforcement such as ICE, who right now I think are not observing what it says in their handbook and how to encounter people or how to arrest them, because they've been according to those rules, they're supposed to do it in the least disruptive way and least confrontational way possible. And that is not my experience, and that's not what's going on the streets right now. And so my concern is that type of lawlessness on one side begets lawlessness on the other side, right? As things escalate, then both sides escalate what they do and how they talk about it. And I think the more that it escalates, the less likely we are to be able to come up with functional solutions.
Mhm. One final question.
Right.
For those in your district
Yes.
who may not be citizens but have went through the legal routes and are in the process
Yeah.
legally of trying to become citizens, um, uh, what is your message to them who feel that they can be targeted at any moment?
Well, uh, for better or for worse, I think it's true. That even if you have a pending application, the policies under the current administration are oftentimes that doesn't afford you any kind of legal status now. And so, with the effort to be able to meet certain metrics as far as the number of deportations, kind of artificial numbers that were established by the president, without necessarily considering the people who are being impacted, doesn't make sense. And so those kind of, in my experience, serving in the legislature and just observing government in the past, whenever you create zero tolerance policies, right, where there's absolutely no tolerance and no discretion for law enforcement, no discretion for judges to be able to do certain things, oftentimes you end up with terrible outcomes or unexpected consequences in certain types of cases. And so I think that's why in the past, under previous administrations, you've had deportation officers who had the discretion to be able to grant bonds in certain circumstances. Unfortunately, that's been taken away. You've had judges who've had the discretion to be able to grant immigration bonds and release people while they fight their cases. You've had the opportunity to be able to submit applications and get your day in court. And unfortunately, a lot of those things that are provided for under the rule of law, under federal statutes, are not being observed right now. And so again, I think that the kind of the chaos and the lack of lawlessness on one side creates, I think responses that are likewise that oftentimes can be more confrontational, less productive, and unfortunately, the people in my district are the ones who are paying the price, right? And so they're the ones who are being stopped in their neighborhoods. They're the ones who are having their windows broken out. They're the ones who are having their seat belts cut off. They're the ones who are being pulled from vehicles right now. And unfortunately, it's not just people who are even though it's terrible for the people who are undocumented to be treated this way, there are U.S. citizens that are finding themselves in these same circumstances. And so one of my employees, her son is a U.S. citizen. He was encountered, in a work truck with three coworkers, and my this young man ended up being taken into custody, even though he was a U.S. citizen. He ended up getting kicked in the ribs to the point where he had bruises, and he ended up having a broken tooth based on the way that he was arrested. And so, unfortunately, I think with Department of Homeland Security right now and early on in the administration talking about kind of a shock and awe approach to immigration enforcement, that's what we're seeing. Is that we're seeing less attention to playing by the rules and more attention toward creating chaos and really trying to scare people out of the country.
Mm. Well, Senator Brooks, thank you so much for your time. I'd like to follow up as we move into session. Thank you so
Yes,
much.
sir. Well, I appreciate your thoughtfulness. And so this is my first time to be able to, I had a chance to be able to look at your podcast, but I'm very impressed and I'm very grateful for the work that you do. So thank you very much.